Welcome, everyone. I'm so happy to see so many of you here, especially our invited speakers today. As you know, we are presenting the career paths in history. It's an informative session and networking event. And I just wanted to welcome you all here to the Department of Art History, and also to recognize the Grad Student Mentor Program, which has done a terrific job this year organizing a series of events, and today's event in particular, and also to recognize the support that we have received from UD Career Services Faculty Staff Career Innovation Grant. Without any more, Ada?
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here, indeed. We want to say a special thank you to Dr. Dominguez Torres for partnering with us in organizing this event, and to all the speakers for coming here today to so generously share their knowledge with the undergraduate students.
So the way it's going to work is we're going to have kind of lightning round, short presentations from all of the speakers, and we just ask that you kind of hold your questions till the end, and we'll have a short Q&A at the very end, and then we have lovely catered food in the lobby following. So if you have a more specific question, you can ask the speakers there at the kind of networking mixer kind of event. So the first speaker we're going to bring up, and thank you so much for being here, is the Vice Provost for Libraries and Museums. Wherever you want to stand.
Yes. Thank you.
Well, I was hoping that I wouldn't be first, so I could get a sense of how the other talks flow and sort of modify mine on the fly. So good afternoon. I'm Trevor, Dawes, the Vice Provost for Libraries and Museums and Mary Morris University Librarian. And I love saying that because just today I was at a meeting, and invariably when I'm at a meeting, I have the longest time of anyone in the room, and it's a lot of fun for me to say. But as the title suggests, I have responsibility for the libraries and museums. Here, there are three galleries that comprise the museums: Old College Gallery, which I hope everyone here has seen since you're in this building, the Mechanical Hall Gallery right next door, and the Mineralogical Museum in Penny Hall down on Academy Street. And if you haven't been there, make sure to visit that collection as well. What's not mentioned in my title, which would make it even longer, is that I also have responsibility for the University of Delaware Press. And so it's really fun for me getting to work with each of those areas. So I've been at UD just coming up on 2 years. And I came here immediately from Washington University in St. Louis, where occasionally I obviously have flashbacks of some and I've also spent some time at Princeton University and Columbia, which is where I started my career in librarianship. I've been working in libraries for over 30 years, and I keep my beard to remind myself of the gray, to remind me of how long I've been working in libraries. I'm also very active in our Library Professional Associations. I've done a lot of work in our professional associations, currently serving as a member of the executive board of the American Library Association, and has served as and past president of the Association of College and Research Libraries, whose conference I'll be chairing that's happening in Cleveland next year. Anybody here from Cleveland? So I mentioned, being in the library, being a library worker for 30 years, because it is only for the last half of that time, about the last half of that span, that I've been in professional positions, as we like to term them in libraries. Because it was at that point that I earned my Master of Library Service, actually. And for years I thought I had a Master of Library Science, which is awarded coming to Rutgers, you have a Master of Library Service. I'm actually checking my diploma. But yeah, so the MLS is often, or the MLIS, Master of Library and Information Science, or the MIS, which is many schools are moving towards this schools of information, is often the required degree for folks who want to have a professional position in libraries. But just a few months ago, I wrote a blog post, and last week, and then I gave a presentation on, is the MLS really necessary for library workers? And by me asking that question, you can probably figure out what my stance is. So, but why did I have the MLS? I held out as long as I could. I was an undergraduate, as a work study student in the libraries at Columbia when I was an undergraduate student, and had some really great mentors who are still friends and mentors today who kept pushing me in this direction. They're very proud, as am I, happy to be here where I am today. And I found that I really enjoyed that work, the work that I was doing, and sort of had progressively positions with progressively greater responsibility, but none of them really at the professional level. I decided to get my MA, the Master of Arts in Educational Administration, because I liked working in the higher ed setting, and Columbia, which had a library school, accepted the last class in their library school program the year before I finished my undergraduate degree. So going to library school at Columbia for free, because it was tuition exempt, didn't seem like a feasible option for me, and so I began to pursue the MA. At some point, though, a position opened up that required the MLS, and my then supervisor said, you're clearly qualified for the job, you've been working in libraries for a long time, but you'll get the job on condition that you get the MLS and off to Rutgers I went. So I believe, though, as I alluded to just a minute ago, that the MLS is not necessarily required in the libraries for the kinds of jobs that we have in our libraries today. And in our history, for example, you might be interested in, obviously at UD, the museums are part of the library umbrella, so there would be opportunities to work in the museums here, but you could also be an art librarian, or you could work in our special collections area, you could work in our conservation area. In fact, we do have in the libraries here students from the art conservation program working both in our conservation lab as well as in our special collections areas. And there are other specialized fields, so, if you've got a Ph.D. in chemistry, or if you've got an advanced degree in a specific subject area, then that can place you very well for being a strong candidate for one of the positions that we have in the library. But there's so many other types of jobs, even outside of the area that you're studying, a digital content specialist, copyright specialist, or thinking of some of the jobs that we just recently filled here in the library, where we hired those who do not have a Master of Library Science. And so there are many ways that one can get into the library profession that doesn't necessarily require the MLS. And certainly I feel kind of odd, saying that as a member of the ALA Executive Board, and ALA is the group that accredits library programs, right? And so there's this tension that I always feel when I talk about not needing the MLS to work in libraries. That over here I'm saying, but for these library schools, you must get the accreditation from this body that I'm very involved in. But I do believe that, to be a library worker, to be a library worker, you just need to have the right knowledge, skills, abilities, experiences that are relevant for the position that we have available. And sometimes that will come with an art history background or some other type of background that does not necessarily include the MLS. So in the short time I can only scratch the surface of what it means to be a library worker and the various paths to get there, but I certainly am open to your questions later and any individual questions that you have for me as time permits. Thank you.
And the next speaker is going to be Amy Earls, Associate Editor of the Winterthur Portfolio.
So I have to wave around some
Oh,
issues.
excellent.
And you're welcome to look at those if you're interested in talking about submitting an article or anything like that. Then we can talk about that too, as well as career paths. Just to say a little bit about managing editor, obviously skills involved are not just editing, although you should have that. You should ideally love words, love using words. You don't necessarily have to be a copy editor. I myself am not a copy editor, but that's largely because I can depend on a publisher, the University of Chicago Press. They literally wrote the book on copy editing in manual style. So they're my safety net. I do kind of copy editing. I mean, I'm fairly competent at it. Mostly content editing, however. And I would distinguish the job of managing editor from that of executive editor, which is someone who's really looking at the vision of the journal and really active in our executive editor is Catherine Dan Rover at Winterthur, with a position also at UD. That person then is guiding the journal and doing most of the networking in terms of establishing the editorial board and communication with them, and of course I support her as I can, but primarily my job it does involve managing the process, so filling the issues with book reviews and articles, and that means juggling deadlines. So if you are not comfortable with deadlines, then probably this is not the right job for you. But if you love working with authors, and especially since we are an interdisciplinary journal, we just get all kinds of amazing topics. I mean, there is no end to the wealth of fascinating topics that people are researching and thinking about and writing about. And they're not always good fits for us, but it's exciting to see what people are doing. The journal is an academic one. It does involve double-blind peer review. So, and less description than as the bottom bullet point, analytical synthetic content. So if as an art historian you were writing artist biography or you were doing critical theory, WP is probably not the journal for you because we really are object focused. Winterthur Portfolio is, I think, kind of unusual in that it's based at Winterthur Museum. I think that most academic journals are actually based at universities, and most managing editors are faculty who get, course relief for serving as journal of an editor. And so WP is unusual in that. I mean, we're a little bit similar to American Art, which is based in the Smithsonian, but we're not exactly set up the same way. I think because of that academic because of the importance of peer review and the fact that most of our authors are faculty members, certainly not all, but many of them are faculty members trying to get tenure, so they need peer-reviewed articles in their tenure file. And so I think primarily because of that reason, you need to have a terminal degree in your field. So my degree is in anthropology. My sort of background was in archaeology. I did a lot of historical archaeology, mostly in the American West. I think, as I mentioned, you need to love words. You should be comfortable with not only editing but communicating clearly your decision with the author and expressing to the author, this is what WP is about. This is what you could do to your manuscript to make it a good fit for WP. And if you're not interested in doing that, then submit it elsewhere. We don't want to waste your time. You want to find a good match for the research you will write. So, it's not, when we write a rejection letter, that they're very hard to write. You have to be very tactful and of course kind. But I mean, the main point is just, we think your research is fascinating, but it's really not a good fit for us. We don't publish this kind of article. So that's a lot of what we do is try to communicate what we do publish. We have a very small staff. In addition to Catherine, the executive editor, and me, we have a graduate assistant who may be an art historian, a historian, or in the English department. And we occasionally have summer volunteers and interns. I think one thing that WP does that other journals may not do so much is we really have found a niche in working with emerging scholars. So graduate students, Winterthur students, we've had really great success in working with them, generally meeting with them, talking about their research. Here's how you could set it up that might be a good fit for WP, and having a face-to-face or Skype meeting, some kind of close interaction with authors to hopefully end up with a win-win. We can be publishing their fantastic work. And that's something, and even when we write our decisions, we don't just say, no, we're not interested. We'll tell you, at least one reason why, and usually it's more specific than that. If we want to encourage an article, we'll say, here's what you need to do that could make it a better fit for WP. All right, then I think that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much.
So our next speaker is going to be Christine Bachman, who's a Ph.D. student in our department. Who's going to talk to you a little bit about that. Yes, so I'm going to continue the library discussion, and so I think there will be some overlap with our first speaker, but also a slightly different perspective. So like Natalie was just saying, I'm a second-year PhD student here in the department, and I study early medieval manuscripts here. To give you some sense of my background and my experience in the field of rare books and manuscripts librarianship, I've listed my education and some of the library positions I've held up here. So a couple of things to point out about this is, first of all, that I have both my master's degree in art history and I'm working on my PhD, as well as my master's of library science. And I happened also to go to a library program where I was able to get a specialization in rare books and manuscripts librarianship. So the thing about that is that it's often desirable, especially in higher level library positions or more specialized library positions like working in the special collections, to have both your library degree as well as your subject master's degree in art history or English or whatever. So that's kind of was the thinking when I got both my master's degree as in art history as well as my library degree. In terms of the library positions I've had, these are all kind of part-time positions, a lot of student jobs, but the main thing is that it's a huge range of different positions that I've held. I got to work with a lot of very different kinds of collections. With these positions, I got to do a lot of different kinds of library work, a lot of cataloging. I got to work with readers, got to help a little bit with exhibits, all different aspects of kind of what you might do in a library. So I got a good sense of what the field was and gained skills to prepare me for a lot of different things. So, some of the things that I really appreciate about the field of rare books and manuscripts librarianship, why would, I want to do this, why would you want to do this? So the first thing is that you get to work really closely with the physical books. When you're in that library, you are around those collections all day, every day. You are handling those books, and that's very exciting. There are many opportunities to teach, to research, to curate exhibits, if you're interested in doing those kinds of things. All of them can potentially come into play when you're working in a special collections library. If you're interested in technology, library work is often on the cutting edge of technological developments because it's so connected to things like database work, to digitization projects, and so that's a big aspect of kind of what you would be involved with potentially. And then the final thing, there's always surprises to be found in the back of the stack. So when I've been working, especially in this kind of rare books collection, it's a constant discovery. You're going through the stacks every day, and you pull something off the shelf, and you open it up, and you might find a note from the owner a couple hundred years ago, or you might notice, a printing anomaly that's specific to your library's copy. There's that constant kind of discovery in those kinds of positions that makes it really exciting. So, you're thinking this all sounds pretty cool. So what would I need to do to, be involved and get into this field? So the first thing that I would suggest is kind of becoming involved in the professional networks, and specifically RBMS, which is the Rare Books and Manuscripts section of the American Library Association. So the American Library Association is huge, so they have different sections for different specialties within the library world, and RBMS is specific to rare books and manuscripts. Work in a library. Go find a library job. There's a lot of positions in libraries that you as a student would be qualified for, and so go, get a sense of what that world is like, whether you like the work. Look into a library school. The American Library Association has all of their accredited programs listed on their website, so you can go and look at that. Get a sense of what those programs are like, the differences between different programs, to get a sense of kind of if that's something you want to pursue. And then the final thing, keep up your love of books. Presumably, if you're thinking about working in libraries, you already love books, but keep pursuing that. Go to the special collections here and request a bunch of things one afternoon, and just spend a few hours handling the books, looking at them, learning about them, things like that. So, that's all I want to say for the moment, but please come and ask me questions.
Thank you. And our next speaker is going to be Amanda Shields.
Hi, everybody. My name is Amanda Shields. I actually graduated from the University of Delaware with an art history and art conservation degree in 2007. And today I thought I'd talk to you about how I became a museum registrar. After I graduated, I earned an internship at the Chemical Heritage Foundation of Philadelphia, which now is known as the Science History Institute, working in the photo archives as an intern. Soon after, I became a full-time image archivist, maintaining photographic collections and assisting with the development of CHF's first permanent exhibition and museum. But then 2008 hit, the recession hit, and my position got cut. So I was transferred to a different project, which was grant funded, digitizing an archive with team of interns. And at that point, I knew really nothing about archival practices, very little about processing an archival collection, but I attended workshops, online seminars, and was able to understand best practices and created digitization standards and created the first electronic finding aid for the entire collection of Gordon Moore, who was the co-founder of Intel Corporation. And that finding aid was later transferred to the Online Archive of California, where the collection was later transferred. So this is where it is right now, even though the entire actual finding aid was digitized. So every folder paper you could click on and read. But due to copyright issues, it's not available. Though learning about archival practices and digitization proved to be valuable, I knew I still wanted to move back into working with art collections and museums, so I decided to pursue my master's degree in museum studies. After doing some research, I chose the Johns Hopkins online program, which was only about 2 years old at the time. But because the courses were entirely online, I was able to keep my job while getting my master's degree. So it took me longer to complete my degree itself, but it proved valuable to be able to apply my work experiences to my coursework and vice versa. For instance, I took a course on exhibition design and documentation, was able to create exhibition plans, and then at work, when we had our own exhibition designer create exhibition plans, I could read the layouts and understand where objects were going where, and so forth. So it proved actually to be very helpful. Not long after I began my studies, I became the curator of fine art and registrar at CHF. This was a unique dual position created by my director for myself and included a multitude of collections care tasks, including overseeing and care of 500 paintings and prints and sculptures. I assisted with the development of temporary exhibitions, performed registration tasks like accessioning, cataloging the collection, condition reporting, inventorying. I developed the collections management policies in the museum and co-curated my first exhibition, Books of Secrets, Writing and Reading Alchemy. And as registrar, I coordinated logistics for various loans throughout nationally and internationally and took courier trips, which as registrar, you have to maintain all of those logistics as far as shipping and crating. So here, I want to walk through the process of creating the fine art that was taken to Germany, where I went through the airport, right on a truck, run on the airplane, go off through customs, screening and everything, and then went through on another truck to the museum in Dusseldorf, where it was later unpacked, and I supervised all of that, eventually was installed, and I did the reverse trip about 6 months later. So as registrar, you're really able to kind of travel all over the world, which I continue to do so today. A few years after I was at CHF, I decided to switch to a different museum called the Brandywine Museum of Art in Chelmsford. I wasn't looking for a job at that point, but I saw it as an opportunity to work in a larger art museum for the first time and be able to work with a larger collection of more famous artists, Wythe family especially, Andrew Wythe and C. Wythe. And at that time, the Brandywine was beginning to undertake ambitious exhibitions programs with their new director, so they needed a larger registrar team to achieve those goals. And an added bonus is I now have a 20-minute commute to home. So as registrar, I continue to perform a variety of collections care activities. And I work with a preparator to track the location and movement of all the fine art collection in our database. I coordinate any conservation treatments with our contract conservators. I oversee all rights and reproductions and copyright and photography for the entire collection. I continue to coordinate logistics for loans throughout the world, including last year I drove a truck from Pennsylvania to Seattle. So it was a 3-day road trip with some truckers and cars, so things to look forward to. And I also manage the collections management database, which we recently were able to put online. As you can see here, which is what I continue to do now, is digitizing our collection and making it available to the public. So that's my journey.
Thank you so much.
So up next, we have Anne Cross, who's going to talk a little bit about
my name is Anne Cross. I am a third-year Ph.D. candidate in art history here at the University of Delaware. You can see my background is primarily in art history. I actually got my BA at NYU in the Individualized Study program at the Gallatin School of Individualized Study. which is a very small program at NYU where you get to make your own major. You choose what classes you want to take over 4 years, and then it results when you're a senior, you have a 3-hour colloquium where you basically explain what you've been doing for the past 4 years, and you justify it with sort of a cohesive ideology. And my individualized major I called Public Policy and Fine Arts, and I was basically examining how museums, how the placement of art in museums shaped visitors' perception of the art. So it was a combination of public policy, museum studies, art history, some psychology. I ended up then deciding I was choosing between MA. I worked for 2 years after my undergraduate degree, and then I decided to go back and get my MA at the Institute of Fine Arts in art history because I lacked that sort of traditional art historical background, and I thought that I needed it. And it was while I was getting my MA that I realized that I just loved research, and that's exactly what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So then I decided to, after 2 more years of working, pursue a Ph.D. in art history here at the University of Delaware. My specialty, for those who don't already know me, is 19th century American art, and particularly the history of photography. So I also teach courses here in 20th century American art. So this is just my work experience. Because I was so fortunate to get my undergraduate and my master's degrees in New York City, where I was surrounded by so many artist foundations and museums, I have been interning, working in museums, working for artist foundations since I was a sophomore in college. So undergraduates, don't fret yet. You know, it's helpful if you can get internships as soon as possible, but I had the unique experience of being in New York, and so there were a lot of opportunities. So I started off in development at the Met because I wanted to understand how museums worked, and then I realized I wanted to get closer to the art. When you're in development, you're sort of organizing fundraising and events and fundraising programs, and so you're not exactly doing research or engaging with the art necessarily. So I, for a couple of various positions, started with the Felix Gonzalez Torres Foundation and the Hans Hofmann Calarese Project and the Richard Presage Art Estate. I worked for the estate of dead artists. I then helped manage their estates, manage the collections that they left behind, and helped manage the interpretation of their works of art that they left behind. After I got my master's degree, I moved down to Philadelphia as the Luce Fellow in American Prints at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and that was where I got to curate my first show. I curated an exhibition on 1930s and 1940s American women printmakers and their use of satire. Since coming to the University of Delaware, I've also pursued an interest in curating contemporary art. So I had no background in contemporary art previously, but I decided that I wanted to try curating and working with living artists. I live in Philadelphia, where there was a very strong art scene. Particularly, there's a lot of artist collectives, a lot of artists making opportunities for themselves, and I saw an opportunity to get involved. And so I just started asking around. I started asking people who will let me write, who will give me a space to curate, and it happened after I just sort of asked everyone I knew that I was able to curate a show of contemporary art at the University of Delaware. My exhibition, The Systems We Have Loved, was on display in Recitation Hall last February. It was a collaborative opportunity that was developed between the programs of art and design and art history, and then they've since continued it. Bridget Killian had an exhibition of artists made by incarcerated individuals in Recitation Hall this year, and they're going to do that next year. So it's all art historians getting involved in contemporary art. And then I should note that my writing has also been featured in the Philadelphia-based web magazine Title, where I write reviews and I do interviews with artists. This show was pretty different because it was curating for a space, and I got to pick artists that I like. I met with artists. You just email artists and you ask them for a studio visit, and you go in and you ask them questions, and they show you their work, and you talk about what influences them. When I curated my exhibition at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, it was a lot different because I was working with a set collection. And I had to think of my specific audience. Who's coming to the Philadelphia Museum of Art? What am I teaching them with this exhibition? This was much more open and, in a way, much more challenging because I didn't really have expectations or a canon to sort of pivot my interpretation against. Instead, it was all coming from me. So with the variety of my experience, I just want to impart a few things that I think will be useful to all the undergraduates and that can be applied to a variety of jobs. First of all, work on your writing skills. listen to your TAs when they give you feedback on your papers, and absolutely meet with them and ask them how you can improve your writing skills. I thought I was a good writer, and then I got into the working world, and I realized I was way too verbose. Learn to be concise, professional, to the point in emails, and that will serve you in every job. And especially if you want to go into the art field and you're going to work with public engagement, learning how to communicate your ideas clearly to your audience is going to be really effective as a curator. Be detail-oriented, work on your research skills. Learn to pursue questions when they come up. And be self-motivated. I just want to stress that I had no experience in contemporary art, and I thought that people would say to me, oh, you're a 19th century art historian, what do you know about people that are living and working today? What can you contribute? And I just went for it, and people were really open and wanted to know what I had to say. And, pursue opportunities for yourself, especially if you want to curate. There's a lot of opportunities to curate with up-and-coming emerging artists that you don't need a ton of money or money for a gallery space. People will want to work with you. And then my last thing was just to pursue what you're passionate and enthusiastic about. People really respond to that. Let yourself fall down the rabbit hole, and I think that as I found with my undergraduate, my master's, and my Ph.D., if you really pursue what you're passionate about, you will be successful at it. So that's all.
Thank you. And our next speaker is Tiarna Doherty.
Good afternoon, good evening. I have worked as a conservator for about 17 years, and I gave up a job so that I could become a student again. Some of us like to come back after a certain amount of time. And I'm not going to talk about conservation per se, but rather about a position that we had at the Smithsonian American Art Museum called Program Coordinator. The position of Program Coordinator is one that you can find in museums in many different departments. And I'm just going to highlight some of the roles that the Program Coordinator took on in our visible conservation studio. And then I can tell you about the two individuals who have the position that I hired for. So here you see the visible labs, and the whole point in having visible conservation labs was that the public could see the work going on. But in order to explain what's going on, you really need a person. We had kiosks there, but people really do like to have interaction. They will bang on the glass walls if we don't have a program coordinator to give tours. And I don't know, I hope you can see, there's a sort of stanchion, a sign at the left side of that bigger slide. Often we would do conservation projects, mostly in the lab, but sometimes in the galleries. And again, when we wanted to communicate what we were doing, the program coordinator would work with us to find ways to use language that was very accessible, to have good photographs up, so they would produce this content for us. They would also help with tours. Susan here is a conservation technician. That is a job that you could get with a bachelor's degree. Susan was particularly good with hair, so she helped us with this Dwayne Hansen, in the galleries. But as the public walk by projects like this, they get interesting ideas about what's going on. So we have a program coordinator, sort of a tour guide to interpret what's happening. Program coordinators help with blogs, social media. We had a Facebook page. All of this fell under their purview. While I worked at the Lunder Conservation Center, professional development was very important to me, not just for the conservators, but for other departments in the museum. So the program coordinator, sort of like an event coordinator, helped organize conferences for which we had receptions. We also did fundraising to support that, because you need to do fundraising to pay for nice receptions like we'll have today. And that conference was on an order of a few hundred people. We also did workshops where we partnered with other institutions that brought us outdoors. So being that contact person can be very exciting, because you'll get to meet not just professional colleagues, but those colleagues who are the program coordinators elsewhere. This is an example of a workshop we did, again, bringing together, this is exhibition design teams who work on lighting, and also scientists who develop LED technology. We partnered, again, with another museum here. And the program coordinator for all of those events was keeping track, again, like an event coordinator, of who was coming, who registered, coordinating materials for the workshops, handouts. And then this is the last slide I put in, just to highlight an activity that it's very common now. Curators, conservators, and others will conduct artist interviews, and we have workshops to help train people for this process, because we are essentially trying to get a lot of information out of artists about decisions they made. Fred Eversley is a sculptor who goes between New York and LA. His piece, the big black round piece at the back, it's an untitled piece from the 70s, from 1974. It was damaged, and we had to recast part of the edge, which was very tricky. So we worked closely with Fred on the project. We interviewed him on video. Those videos might be edited then to go online later. So all of that fell under the purview of the program coordinator. And the people we hired for that job, one had a master's degree in art history, and he had worked in the exhibitions department. The other person had a bachelor's degree in art history. And both were excellent communicators, just following points made by Annie, and also just had basic skill sets in using Excel. They were quick learners, very organized, but ultimately communication was the most important part. Whenever we had guest speakers who were naughty and didn't sort of submit something, the program coordinator might whisper to me, like, oh, I'm so annoyed with them, around a corner. But of course, they were always very professional in their communications with our guests. All right, I'm happy to talk to you about conservation or the program coordinator job at the break.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is going to be Samantha Dorsey to talk about this one.
Well, welcome. It's so nice to see so many people. Some people I didn't expect, but I'm so happy to see. I'm delighted to introduce you to George Mason's Gunston Hall. It's a historic home in Lorton, Virginia, which is about 35 minutes south of Alexandria, or D.C., by the way, crow flies. And it is a historic house. And what is really great is that I get to talk about kind of the combination of experiences in this room. I am honored to be in charge of a rare book library, a reference library, an archive collection, decorative art collection, an art collection, a house, an exhibition corridor, an exhibition gallery, and sometimes a living garden, though not really in charge of that. I do get to advise. This morning I gave tours to 400 school students from around Northern Virginia. I am covered in sunscreen. And today I get to talk to you. It's kind of like a mini resume of my daily activities here. How did I get to Gunston Hall? This wonderful place. And I just wanted to show you what you're missing, but I hope you and see. Historic homes are really great, especially historic homes at small museums. Don't discount those small places across the country. They may not have the largest reputation or collection, but they really give you an opportunity to flex your wings and do just about everything. My museum career began when I was 12 at Claudemoor Colonial Farm, which is a small historic house in McLean, Virginia, where you as a child can learn first-person interpretation. So we had costumes, we received training about how to talk, walk, about the material culture of the age. And because of kind of where I fall in terms of age groups, I was also right at the edge of SOLs. Are you guys, anyone from Virginia? Standards of learning tests are pretty tough, and in the late 90s and early 2000s, it was a really tough transition for our teachers. And teaching in the classroom was something I decided I didn't want to do, and that there was another place for me. And having this experience as a kid taught me museums was it. So I was really lucky. I figured out what I wanted to do, just not what my path would be. Again, I was really lucky. I went to JMU, and I received my undergraduate degree in public history with a concentration in preservation. So I know lots of random facts about how to take care of old things, particularly buildings. And then there, I had a wonderful teacher who actually went to UD in the Winterthur program. So it was kind of a natural progression in my life. One thing that defined my career is that it's not just defined by jobs, but it's defined by internships. We kind of joke or at least I remember in my internships, my bosses would be like, I wish I was doing what you were doing. And as an intern, I was like, you're crazy. Why would you want to do this? I just want your job. And now that I have their job, I really agree that I just want to do what my interns are doing. Don't discount that experience. And always put yourself out there. I always also worked at the same time. Having that experience of being responsible, getting paid, having specific duties, and working with other people is really important. In fact, it's more important than you having that correct internship. So I made sure I also did that. And I also networked throughout the entire experience. So after I went to UD, I was very fortunate in 2008, you'll remember what was happening then, to get a job at Mount Vernon as an online research associate, researching George Washington's objects, trying to figure out what was original, what wasn't, working with this lady in the back of the room, however briefly. And then I realized that I was a small fish in a big pond, and maybe we should reverse that, see what that experience was like elsewhere. And I worked as the curator for the City of Bowie Museums, Bowie, Maryland. Also another place you should give a chance to, really darling. 3 historic sites, 4 if you count it a certain way. Another historic house you see again. And I was there for 6 years before the position at Gunston Hall opened up. And it was kind of a perfect fit. I had all of these varied experiences that combined into interpreting George Mason's world of ideas in this historic house, a period room setting. And it requires that I am not just a curator's curator, but I am a curator who is primarily an educator. So I put objects, while really big in my life, are kind of secondary on the list of priorities. And that's how I was able to shop myself to this wonderful institution and the people I get to work with on an everyday basis. If you guys have questions about that journey, how I got there, how I advocated for myself through networking, internships, and other jobs, I would be happy to speak with you. My network is yours, so I have plenty of cards to hand out. I hope you find me on LinkedIn, and we'll talk more.
Thank you.
Next, thank you very much.
I've scripted mine to stay at 7 minutes.
Good for you.
Or a few seconds over. So don't start your timer. So even though I'm currently an architectural historian, I'm going to start today by talking about a past life, my experience selling real estate in Connecticut. While real estate may seem like a bit out of place at an art history careers event, it's actually a perfect opportunity. Because some of the most important advice I can impart to you today is 1, that your life might take unexpected turns, and that can be a good thing. 2, your career will probably take you down several different paths, and you'll evolve and grow as part of that process. And 3, that you should all consider yourselves entrepreneurs, which I feel like is a theme a few speakers have now kind of touched on. Because no matter what career paths you may choose in the future, make no mistake that you will need to be at least sometimes think like a salesperson. Perhaps you will need to sell yourself to potential employers, selling yourself as a brand. But in many of the careers being discussed today, you will also need to think like an entrepreneur. Fundraising will be a reality that you will likely grapple with, for example. Whether selling the importance of your project for a grant, or convincing the museum director that your proposed exhibition is worth the required funds, or possibly cultivating donors to support your institution. You will probably at least be part of a team that needs to think like entrepreneurs. I never would have guessed that I'd sell real estate. I just stumbled into it shortly after I bought a condo as a graduate student in history at the University of Connecticut. The only required level of education needed to be a real estate agent, especially in residential sales, is to complete a salesperson classes and pass a state licensing exam. Anyone here could probably do that in 3 to 6 months. And many brokers will hire anyone that has a license in hand and that seems to be somewhat motivated. Because the bar is fairly low and the earning potential is fairly high, there are quite a few agents out there to compete with. People warned me that I'd be lucky to sell 10 properties in my first year, since establishing myself as a new agent would be tough. Yeah, I went into the real estate business arm with a master's degree in American history, a museum experience at the Mark Twain House in Hartford and Old Sturbridge Village in Massachusetts, and most importantly, a desire to differentiate myself by specializing in historic house sales. I aggressively pursued the historic or antiques home market, as it's called there, and attracted lots of clients because of it. I sold 25 properties in my first year and totaled 34 sides, as they call it. That means that for many deals, I represented both the sellers and the buyers. I earned 6 figures almost accidentally in my rookie year in real estate, and my education and specialization in historic homes was a major part of that. One of the most important ways I accomplished this was by developing a mailing list of old houses in eastern Connecticut, eventually totaling over 2,000 addresses, to which I mailed this newsletter quarterly. I used it to distinguish myself from other agents as an expert in historic preservation and architecture and old house marketing. Besides compiling the most recent data for historic house sales, which you can see there on the front page, I featured small articles about historic architecture. In this case, on the second page, an overview of the Gothic Revival style. Historic house owners loved this, and I would often get come list to me calls, meaning they didn't even interview other agents, they just knew that they wanted to hire me. They knew that they wanted me to market their house because people recognize when you're truly passionate and knowledgeable about something. Beyond marketing my expertise in this way, I never got into the salesy part of real estate very much. I believe that my job, once hired, was to highlight the strong points of a house and then let it sell itself. People don't react well to pressure when they're making one of the most important decisions of their lives. So I would research the history of a property, highlight that, and the architectural elements that made a house special, and just offered solid guidance about old houses and what it entailed to own one. By specializing in this niche market, I got to tour hundreds of neat houses, learned a ton about historic architecture, and I found out that it was rewarding to find informed buyers for historic properties, which aided in their preservation. Ironically, though, even in those days, as I self-educated in historic architecture and preservation, I wasn't aware of the many career opportunities there were in preservation. It was only after my son was born and I moved back to my home state of Ohio that I really made that discovery. I was teaching history at a community college, and the dean asked me to compile a report about careers in historic preservation. During that study, I realized the breadth of career opportunities in preservation work and decided myself to go back to school for a master's degree in historic preservation. And that is how I ended up here at Delaware. There are several different jobs one might take in the preservation world, but two of the most common, which require similar training, are architectural historians and preservation planners. Architectural historians tend to focus more on researching and writing about historic buildings, while preservation planners tend to administer government programs and regulations. But there's a lot of overlap. Preservation planners sometimes have training in public policy and planning, and are frequently hired by city or county governments. Architectural historians also work in all levels of the government, but many work in the private sector, especially with cultural resource management companies, or CRM firms, and with nonprofit organizations. I am an architectural historian, but my position is a bit unique since I work in academia, here at UD in the Center for Historic Architecture and Design, also called CHAD. I spend a lot of time writing nominations for the National Register of Historic Places. I also assist with historic district surveys, where we go out to historic districts or possible districts and fill out official state cultural resource forms for each property about its architecture. I sometimes create architectural drawings of threatened buildings, both in the field and in AutoCAD. We also sometimes do historic structures reports, or HSRs, which are detailed histories and analyses of the historic fabric of buildings. These are all fairly typical tasks for architectural historians, and similar to the work that they do in CRM firms. However, working for a research center at the university also affords me the additional opportunity of teaching preservation and architecture courses. Speaking of coursework, what are the educational requirements to be a historic preservationist? The qualifications for the field are actually defined by the Secretary of Interior standards for preservation professionals. It's sort of complicated because these standards stipulate various mixtures of education and experience. But in short, a master's degree in historic preservation is preferred, but a degree in a related field or a certificate in preservation, along with some related work experience, typically qualifies you for entry-level positions. Here at the university, you can acquire both. In addition to your bachelor's degree in a related field, you can earn a graduate certificate in historic preservation. Even undergrads can. And at CHAD, we hire undergrads, usually at about 10 hours a week, who are able to gain real-world experience on preservation projects here in Delaware. If you're interested in the certificate or working at the center next year, don't hesitate to chat with me or shoot me an email. Thank you.
Next, we have another Ph.D. student in the department, Emily is going to talk about
Hey, thanks for promoting me to PhD candidate. I'm actually a first-year PhD student here in the art history department at UD. And I know some of you from classes, but you may not all know that I also had a 10-year career in New York commercial art world. I spent 3 years working for a private collector, and then spent 7 years working at Christie's and its flagship offices in New York as a senior account manager and vice president in the estates and appraisal department. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later, but suffice to say, estates, I'm not talking about a huge mansion on a beautiful lawn. I'm talking about what Annie was talking about when she said estates. I was managing the property of dead people. My BA is from Yale. I have a BA in art history and also drama, which I like to say I definitely used in my career at Christie's. And I recently decided to make the return to graduate school and received my master's degree from Winterthur in American Material Culture just about a year ago. Just to give you some background, if you're not familiar with kind of the major auction houses of the world, I know Christie's and Sotheby's are probably familiar names to you all. These are the larger international auction houses, which are really two very similar firms locked in an ongoing death battle to differentiate themselves from one another in order to win business from a very similar group of clients. As I mentioned, there are flagship offices for both of these firms in New York, and there are also major headquarters in other urban centers like London and Paris and even Hong Kong. So if you're interested in international travel, there are absolutely opportunities to make that happen if you jump on board one of these two houses. There are also some other auction houses that might not be familiar to you. There's Phillips, which is kind of giving Christie's and Sotheby's a run for its money right now in the contemporary art market. And then there are, that's also an international firm. Then there are also some more nationally based firms like Heritage, which has, I think they're based in Texas, but they now have offices in New York too and in other cities around the country. And then you might decide that someplace like Doyle, which is just a New York firm, or other smaller local auction houses in places like Chicago or down south in various cities might have kind of a nicer, slightly more intimate workplace feel for you. So there are a lot of different options, but all of these different houses are really going to have the same fundamental underlying goals, which is to just constantly be looking for opportunities to bring in the best property and then to turn it around and sell it. I would actually say it's the first of those two goals that really is going to drive your day-to-day work at an auction house. Property, like Michael was saying, if it's really great, you can point out the highlights and it's going to sell itself. It's really the question of wrestling that property away from your competitors that's going to occupy most of your time. So I can talk to you further about what I was doing in particular at Christie's later if you'd like, but I just thought I would walk you through some of the different roles that are available at a place like Christie's where I was working. Because there really is a wealth of different kinds of roles out there that you might be interested in. The first one you'll probably think of is kind of the folks you see on Antiques Roadshow who are really involved most primarily with the actual objects that are going to come up for sale. These are the folks who really have the expertise to provide valuations for different works of art if someone needs a valuation for insurance purposes or tax purposes or something like that. And they're also the ones who are going to have that market knowledge to say, that chair looks like it's worth $8,000 to $12,000, and I'm going to take that from you, and I'll offer this chair for sale. If Tiarna buys it from us, then you'll get you'll get the full hammer price, which is what we like to call it, and then the auction house in exchange is going to collect a commission from both Tiarna and from you as the consignor. So that's the basic business model that makes the auction house money. The specialist that's a role that does not require a master's degree. In fact, none of these roles, I would say, require anything above a BA. In the auction world, it's really about your relationships and building up your credibility. If you really want a position where you can start at the ground level and work your way up the corporate ladder, this is a great place to be. A place to start really would be one of these roles, like the administrator role. Lots of different departments have administrators, but if you want to be most kind of involved in the nitty-gritty, you'll be a sale administrator. So if you're interested in 19th century French art, you'll work in the Impressionist and Modern department, where you'll be helping the specialists really administer the details of the usually biannual sales that they're having. So tracking property as it's coming in, getting it photographed, making sure that it's ready for sale, getting put into the catalogs with all the details correctly listed, and then helping actually with the business of selling the sale, getting in there, contacting your clients, being on the phone the day of the auction, and taking bids when you're in the sale room. So it's really a very exciting job. It can have a lot of responsibility, and so as an entry-level job, you're really going to be on the front lines and getting to meet clients and actually look at objects. So that can be really exciting. It is definitely a job that requires a lot of energy. It requires being able to handle high-pressure situations. You're going to have clients calling you and screaming at you about things. You will have clients who are super nice to you, too. But it's just the kind of job that really requires you to be adaptable and constantly thinking on your feet and really presenting yourself in a professional way to whoever might come through the door or call, because you never know, Mr. Rockefeller might not be wearing a fancy suit. You never know what opportunities are going to come up. I need to wrap up. Okay. I'll just quickly mention also another entry-level position would be a front-of-house role where you're really greeting clients as they're coming in the doors to look at the exhibitions. It's another really exciting thing that makes the auction house dynamic. You might not know this, but you can wander into Christie's or Sotheby's anytime you want, and there will probably be a world-class exhibition of property on view for you to take a look at. And excitingly, it will also have price tags on each of these objects. I'm happy to talk with you further about any of these other roles, including my role as a project manager in estates and appraisals, which took me all over the country looking at all kinds of different objects. Although I decided ultimately I wanted to pursue a more research-based career that would give me, that would allow me to give sort of access to members of the public rather than serving an elite clientele. I loved my time in the auction house, and I absolutely recommend it if you think it's right for you. Thanks. Thank you.
I'm giving one group. Okay. And so she didn't mention the advantages.
Oh yeah, sorry, they're very similar.
Okay, and last I am going to speak on behalf of Carol Nigro, representing our dealership. She's a UD alumna, and actually I have to say her husband, who's also an art dealer, is going to be on campus on May 10th and 11th, and he'll be available for the students to talk about our dealership, so keep that in mind, please. So let me first tell you about her education background, because she got her BA in political science and then an MFA at NYU School of Film and Television. She didn't finish her MFA. She worked for a while in the film industry, but at some point there was this opportunity for her to become a professional art dealer, and so she pursued that. And in order to become a serious professional, she decided that she needed an MA and a Ph.D. in art history, so she returned to graduate school. She came here to the University of Delaware and pursued her graduate studies. And so what she and her husband developed was this business, Charles Isaacs Photographs. How this started is very interesting because her husband was a photojournalist, and so he was taking pictures, but he was also buying photographs at auctions. And at some point, he amassed an interesting collection of 19th century photographs when photography was not considered an art form, so he bought them cheap. But suddenly they realized that they had a collection that could work as an object to deal with. And so Carol Nigro and her husband became private dealers in vintage photography. Their customers are American fine arts museums. Developing these tasks requires close relationship with photography department in museums. So it's important to get to know each department's staff, but also study their photography collection and their donors' tastes in order to anticipate their needs. That's something that Carol Nigro remarked, anticipating their needs. And so Carol Nigro's advice for a starting art dealer is focus on one area, research it thoroughly, create a market for it, cultivate the customers, convince them that your works are what they need, basically. Tolerance for risk. You have to take risks and believe in what you're doing in order to pursue this career. Definitely have the faith in the objects you are trading. Also do research on museums donors, as I mentioned. Communication is key, and she gave me several examples in which she is publishing on a daily basis. So she writes press releases, auction catalogs in which she contributes entries, but also book publications about artists that she represents. So writing skills is something that she really emphasized. She also mentioned the changing look of the art system now, where it used to be that the gallery model was the prevalent way to go, but now many galleries seem to be closing, and there's stronger emphasis on art fairs, so that might be a possibility to consider getting involved in art fairs. Especially advice for our undergrads here would be insert yourself into the art system if this is a career path you want to consider. So volunteer at a museum, work and volunteer at an art gallery, get to know local young artists like Anne Cross mentioned, start working with them, but also use your network. This is something Carol Nigro told me, that when she came to UD, one of the most important aspects for her was really creating a community of professionals with her colleagues, and she told me that she's still in contact with most of them and collaborates with them on a regular basis. So for her, getting her Ph.D. here was a way to start building her network. So that's also very important. Use your research to contact dealers, write for art dealers and galleries, and finally, learn how the marketplace works by working in an auction house, as Emily mentioned. Key elements: communicate well, the writing skills, right? That's really important. Know your objects. Also, learn how to run a business. And finally, be creating and exploiting your contacts, both your mentors, your colleagues, university alums, and we have here a very generous, actually, network of alums, right? So that's something you should use. The level of schooling of art dealers, it's regularly the MA, although because of the emphasis on writing scholarly catalogs from art galleries, more and more people with PhDs are required. And finally, keep in mind different positions within the art market, like working in the development, research, and cultivation of customers. So actually telling people they need to buy art before they even think about it. And communication, writing in blogs, in social media, that's also another option that you might consider. And this is all I have to say about it. Thank you so much.
I just want to close by thanking again everybody who came today. Students, we've circulated a sign-up sheet for you to write your name. And if you want us to share your information with Career Services, we will do so. Oftentimes they have events and information that they can circulate among our art history majors or students who are interested in art history. So I think we are all hungry, so we can go out and eat because we have a lot of food out there. But again, our speakers are here. They are going to hang around, and then we can, you can ask them particular questions that you need to have, okay? As opposed to opening it up to questions, we're going to ask you to ask questions while you are out there eating a little bit and getting a little bit of fun. And also to thank our speakers, we want to give you a little bit of a token of appreciation. So these girls, so thank you. There you go. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay. See, she was matching it with your dress. Yeah. Thank you so much to all the speakers.